With ClearanceJobs.com, thank you for joining us for a live video update wherever you happen to be streaming your content. Drop a hi. Until that happens, I never know if you're actually watching. Super excited today to be chatting with David Brown. David, I've harassed you before, mostly about your books and other content, but you've been writing about the Army Combat Fitness Test on ClearanceJobs since 2018. This morning, you posted yet another update about America's favorite combat fitness test and about how the current 2024 NDAA has plans to squash the fitness test. So talk a little bit more about that in your article and why you hate the ACFT so much.
Well, that's a big question. So last week, the National Defense Authorization Act, the Senate version, came out of the Senate Armed Forces Committee on I think it was a 24-1 vote. So there seems to be a lot of joy about the NDAA this year. So it's going to go to the full Senate for a vote. After that, obviously the House has to pass their own version, and then they've got to reconcile it. But at present, the Army Combat Fitness Test is, in the Senate version, is no more. That doesn't mean it's gone for good. This thing's like the undead. You just can't get rid of it. But it seems that at least half of Congress is ready to be finished with this ongoing drama. The ACFT is a complete misnomer. It is not a combat fitness test. It has never tested combat fitness. That was simply marketing. Because if you call something combat fitness, everyone has to be in favor of it. How could you possibly be against combat fitness? But this has always been designed to test the physical capabilities or just basic physical fitness of soldiers. It's not a one-size-fits-all process. I see all of these messages popping up. I've never done that before. I'm going to try to ignore them. Anyway, this has never been a test of combat fitness. It has always been a few officers at the top really wanting to make their mark on the Army, and it's been one catastrophe after another.
Yeah, well, don't worry about the comments, David. The comments are my job, so I'll check them out. So it is interesting. Like already, somebody commented they're cutting it because of the VA claims coming from the PT. I don't think that could happen yet. Do you think they've already had VA claims coming from Army Combat Fitness Test? Devil's advocate, though, there's the exercises they have you do for the Army Combat Fitness Test are not necessarily bad. And I told you I wore a tank top for a reason, because these guns were sponsored by the ACFT, because you did an article for us in 2018 about how 84% of women were failing the test, and it went viral. And I took the ACFT. Saggy mom of 4, tired middle-aged woman, Lindy Kaiser, took the Army Combat Fitness Test, also failed the leg tuck, but I refused to accept failure, so I trained until I could do a leg tuck. And then they got rid of the leg tuck and added a plank. But I'm just saying it is possible, even for a woman, to pass the ACFT. The biggest argument and pushback you have against it is the cost. And I totally get behind you. But this is where it's painful, because they've already spent $78 million on the ACFT. They make these programs that are too big to fail. But you talk about that, like the old test versus the new test, equipment and what's required. Is that kind of your biggest pushback? They took something that was super simple and made it super complex. Is it the cost? Do you just hate CrossFit, David? Tell me more.
I think I hate CrossFitters, but CrossFit itself, there's nothing wrong with it. I think so. So my problems with the ACFT go down the line. First of all, the Army Physical Fitness Test was not broken. Okay, if you could max out the Army Physical Fitness Test, you were physically fit. I've never seen someone score 300 on the APFT and not look like someone who could absolutely run 2 miles and win a bar fight if necessary. And this goes for men and women. You showed me a woman who gets a 300 on the APFT, and that is somebody who is not to be trifled with. And I've seen soldiers, because it's the sort of test that you can very easily train for, right? You can do this in your own time. You don't need to have special equipment, whether you're guard, reserve, active duty. Everybody can run, everybody has arms for push-up, and everyone can do sit-up. So you've got upper body, you've got core, and you've got basic endurance, okay? If the Army felt that this test was inadequate to the needs of of the U.S. Army, then they could have raised the standards, make it harder to get a 300, make it easier to fail. I mean, this could have been handled in Microsoft Excel. Instead, what we decided to do was spend, I don't know, 78 million that we know of, 100 million, who knows? Just in the lost productivity, we've got to factor in several millions of dollars right there. Fill in LMTV worth of gear, drive that LMTV to a perfect training ground or testing ground. Make sure it's a perfectly dry day, because of the drop of dew on the ground, the ACFT, according to the rules, is no longer valid. If you're in the Northeast, my goodness, if there's snow, and I hear that it snows in the United States on occasion, you're out. You can't do a test that day. But what you can do is build enormous structures for taking this absurd test at the cost of millions more dollars. So yeah, I do have a problem with the expense. But I also have a problem with the nomenclature. As I said, it's not testing combat fitness. This has always been about getting soldiers in shape, and that's a worthy goal. But you can't pretend that this test that was just made up, okay? The leg tuck was just made up, and it was decided that makes someone combat fit. And then when literally everyone pushed back, the Army said, well, that's not really important for combat fitness. Well, is it or isn't it? I mean, if we really want to raise standards, you could just make SEAL training the default for the U.S. military. You could or special forces or Rangers. Let's just put everyone through Ranger school. Why not? If we want to be combat fit, why not just make that the standard?
Well, I mean, that's the Marines are commenting. The Marines, of course, are loving this fight that the Army is having about their Army combat fitness test, just saying, just do it the Marine way, which sounds like Marines. I mean, that is the topic too. Like, we don't have a universal fitness standard across the service branches. So that's another conversation entirely. It is like kind of crazy to think about the amount of time and effort for this Army fitness test, and knowing that is only one branch of our service that does that. Like, I mean, do you have any thoughts on that? I don't think you've written about that before, so I'm just, shooting things out here. But like, Space Force has had to figure out what their fitness test is. I mean, Air Force is going to walking now. Like, why do each of the service branches get to spend so much money and have their own fitness test? And you've served in multiple branches, so you have that perspective. I mean, why is it different?
No, I mean, first of all, I don't think there needs to be a unified standard, because if the Space Force is picking up a rifle and charging into combat, we're doomed anyway. Like, the war is lost. But similarly in the Army, there is a complete reason why every soldier in the Army should be physically fit. Nobody disputes that. I think the Army's push to have healthier chow halls, I think that's a great thing. But what I don't like is this first of all, this idea that we need to have one standard for men and women across all ages. That's absurd, because that means either a 17-year-old male who should otherwise be the tip of the spear of our fighting force has to also meet the same standard as a 61-year-old woman. That's never so either we make the standard impossible for half the Army, or we make the standard unbelievably easy for the other half of the Army. So from its beginning, that was the ACFT's real ultimate flaw. But then what we did, we said, well, we'll just give everybody different standards again. Well, that's good, I guess, but if we're going to do that anyway, why did we change the physical fitness test? Because again, they're both physical fitness tests. They're both the same thing. They could have called this APFT 2.0, and you know what? I'd probably get on board with it. But it should also be body weight based. It should not be, you should not need all this ridiculous gear, because if you're in the Guard or Reserve in particular, where are you going to get a 60-pound sled, or however, have 90-pound sled? Like, this is not the stuff that I expect an E1 private to go buy with his or her own money. There's no reason for unified physical fitness across the branches, because different branches have different physical fitness requirements or needs. Again, Space Force and a Marine should not be both training the exact same way. I mean, I guess you could, but you're going to lose a lot of valuable people in the Space Force.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And Carly hit on the same point that you made, talking about how she's in the reserve. As a reservist, is really hard to get the tools, training, resources to do that. Several folks pushing back, same thing, saying trying to take the test downrange, very difficult getting access to all that equipment if you're in a deployed scenario. So a lot of complication around the test. And like you said, they've had to expend a lot of resources in the Army to justify taking this test. Now to see Congress potentially saying, hey, no, we're going to go back. For me, I think we're going to have probably readiness issues though around this at this point, because we're pushing back the time for having a standardized test. As you know, promotions, ability to qualify for schools all require how well you do on taking the test and your fitness. And it looks like what we're basically saying is we're punting back on having a test that you actually have in record, like a record keeping process around your fitness. So any thoughts around, kicking the can even further back on actually having a test that we can apply and use? David has frozen brilliantly, or frozen. He fell asleep while I was talking to him. That's basically what it looks like. What happens to me often, most of my conversations, people do actually fall asleep. Comments coming in. Army bought all the equipment, even for the reserves, the National Guard. I guess that's why it costs $78 million to take this test, is the significant cost there. I mean, it is a very expensive test with a lot more complication than the other test. The issue that I see is that we've already had this in process and had it there, and we've invested so much money. I think I mentioned this before. You have the issue where you've kind of created a program that is too big to fail in some cases, because when you've already invested all of that time, energy, resources, we have folks taking the test. It is really complicated to go pivot back and then forth. So again, if you're just tuning in, Lindy Kaiser, ClearanceJobs, talking about the Army Combat Fitness Test. Why are we talking about the Army Combat Fitness Test? Because a lot of you care about the Army Combat Fitness Test. David Brown on the live stream was talking about his writing about the test. He's been writing about the Army Combat Fitness Test since 2018, when the test first started being used and when it was first announced. Now we're looking at, what is time? I'm not good with numbers. 2018, 19, 20, 21, 22. I'm trying to count right now, David, which is really hard for me. I'm trying to count. You left a blonde trying to count years. But it's been since 2018 when we were talking about the Army Combat Fitness Test. And now we're talking about the possible failure of the test. And I was kind of mentioning before, after you have so much time and money and resources, we create these programs that are too big to fail. So I don't know if you have thoughts on that. You've covered space programs before, so spending a lot of money on things that fail is probably not anything new to you. But do we reach this point where there have to be so many people advocating for the test and just saying that they cannot, once you've already invested all of the money in it, we have all this equipment now sitting. Are we just going to have equipment that's sitting that we're not going to do anything with?
Well, so I'm assuming that you can see me again, because I missed about 10 minutes of what you just said. But I will say, okay, so we've invested all that money in that equipment. That's great, because soldiers still need to train. I mean, units do have their own gymnasiums, Guard, Reserve, and active duty. So it's not like your hex bar is going to suddenly have no utility at all, or your 360 pounds of plates or whatever. I'm sure soldiers can drag their sled around if they want to. That would be great. So you can still use them, and in fact, units can still incorporate that stuff into their PT. I think if you can get a 600 on the ACFT, you could probably get a 300 on the APFT. So again, this could be the cat is joining me. This could be handled at the unit level. This is the kind of thing that battalions can incorporate into their regular physical fitness training, but it's absurd to require this for baselines.
Yeah. Brian says put them all in the military gyms. So I guess we'll have military gyms with CrossFit. I love the cat. This is the cat. I have my cat here too. Ben, David, what's your cat's name?
This is Toff.
Toff and yeah. Ben. Meet Toff and Ben. This is like viral. This is like viral video content right here, David. We have cats. If like this video 200,000 times, and David and I will fly to DC and take the ACFT. He actually won't do it, but I will. Nobody's gonna like this video 200,000 times. So you're fine. I feel like a YouTube influencer, like my kids watch. So you have a ton of questions, coming in and comments about the test. That is the issue. You kind of create people become passionate about their fitness. There is some element. Now, I've never served in the military, so I don't know, David, but I feel like there were a lot of folks who were passionate about the ACFT who were never that passionate about the regular physical fitness test. True or false? Or were there or were there people who were like really dedicated to run push-ups, sit-ups? I don't know. And why do we have this phenomenon now where people are super dedicated to making this ACFT that never really cared about the old school fitness test?
I think that for sure, it's not that anyone has been in love with the APFT. Again, all of these, the individual evaluation events in any physical fitness test are going to be arbitrary to some degree. But what you've got to ask is, can we implement this test quickly? Can we, if I need to get a soldier to a school, how can I test him or her right now, right? Well, I can do an APFT in no time. To do the ACFT, it's a little bit more work. When I get a soldier to a school and we have to test him or her, again, do we, can we just do it easily, or do we have to have this set up constantly? I mean, there's all sorts of problems. Somebody had mentioned in the comments, see, I'm drawn to them now, that most Guard and reservists don't have military gyms or ACFT equipment. That's correct. I mean, they don't have access to it. Yes, no, read the article. Like that's a huge problem with it. But what I mean is there's still a cage at your unit probably that has some physical fitness gear. And if your unit has been given that ACFT gear, they're still going to keep it unless it's just sent. Or although probably the Army way would be to just ship it all back to DC and it's all just going to be scrapped. So I don't. Maybe I'm completely wrong. I forgot about the Army way. But this is look. Nobody doubts that the ACFT is it is a physical fitness test that will indeed measure physical fitness. The real problem, though, is one, these events are arbitrary, and these events are borderline absurd if you have to do regular regular physical fitness tests. They're a pain to implement, as we've seen, because they've been trying to implement it for 10 years now, and they haven't gotten it right once. I made a comment in the article that I just wrote, and I think I deleted it before I filed it, but every time I write the story, I have to explain what the ACFT is. And again, I've been covering this since 2018, and every time I write the list of what you have to do for the ACFT, either events change, or the names of events changes, or how you conduct the events change. It clearly, if this were some scientifically designed examination of physical fitness, which it's not. Again, everyone who studied this test says the exact same thing. They just made it up, which is great, but let's not pretend it's something that it's not. Let's not pretend that if you pass this, you are combat fit. You're not, because if you could do well on the APFT, you are also combat fit. I mean, and in either way, none of those things are actually measuring true combat fitness. So the name drives me crazy, because as you can just see, having to talk about it again and again.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you mentioned that in the article that you wrote. And again, the article is linked in the show description here. So if you're looking for that article, go to clearancejobs.com right now. It's on the homepage, or you can check out the description. But you do talk about that. The scoring sheet for this also super complicated. I mean, that was the issue too. They were trying to create a universal baseline across genders, which did not work out well, because that created huge issues for women trying to take the test and score well. So what you ended up with is the scoring sheet has changed so many times. I mean, that's been complicated to figure out. So knowing where you stand in terms of the ACFT and how you pass has continually changed and made it a lot more difficult in terms of the scoring. And yeah, there's a lot of comments. People have like a lot of things they dislike about the test, things they want to change. But the issue has been not actually having a universal baseline standard that's been consistent and that's been applied consistently. I think it makes it really hard to take the test. But not going away yet. I mean, and I do have issues. Like I worked at the Pentagon. So the Pentagon is my military experience. There were a lot of people that struggled to maintain fitness. I mean, this is not where you go to like train. You go to like write policy documents. We have a fitness issue in the military, I will say, and in a country writ large. Addressing fitness would not necessarily be a bad idea. Do we just need to get better compliance for the old school fitness test? I do see the genesis behind the military saying, hey, we are not as fit and combat ready as we need to be. No? I mean, yes.
No, I mean, here's an idea. Let's just make the minimum APFT score 70% on every, or 70 points on every event. There, I just solved the problem. I will take a check for $50 million rather than the $78 million that we've spent on this absurdity of a test. Somebody commented on the side that, Let me see here. I disagree. There are parts of the test that correlate directly to combat. Yes, you're right, of course, because in combat you have to lift things up and move from point A to point B. I mean, nobody disputes that. The question is, and there was one person who's an insider who had talked to me about this exam, who was actually one of the people who initially had to evaluate the ACFT for the Army. Okay, stop going crazy now. He said, well, if we're gonna measure, for example, the ability to pick up 2 ammo cans and run from point A to point B, why do we need kettlebells to do that? Why don't we just use ammo cans? Because that's what we have in the Army, right? But that's not what this was about. This was never about that. This is about spending money, looking good for your promotion. That is the people who are designing these tests, that they keep changing because they have nothing to do with combat fitness, because the events are all just made up. We're seeing this again and again and again. We're going to continue to see it. If the Senate has its way, I have a hard time believing that the ACFT goes away. I have a feeling that it's just gonna we'll need to put a stake through its heart again and again and again. And then they'll have some new name like the Army, combat menace test or something like that, and it's going to be even better. And I'm sure everyone will have all the gear will be painted black because that's how the Army does things. And you probably get a beret if you pass it, and we can go back to the old days.
Oh, fantastic. I have something to work towards. I feel like that was like a closing monologue, so I don't want to ruin it by just talking and using my shill anymore, but I appreciate your commenting. Again, David's going to keep writing about it because he just has to, because he has a lot of passion around the Army Combat Fitness Test. So read his most recent article about it and continue to follow the coverage. We will keep you posted on what happens. For now, again, we have a lot of back and forth across the NDAA until anything is finalized. So we do not know where the Army Combat Fitness Test is going to go, but potentially it could go away. But read more over at ClearanceJobs.com. Did you have any final parting shots, David, before I let you go?
Yes. By all
Yes.
means, if you disagree with me, I encourage you not to email me because I already got made sleep. But I will say that stop spending this money, stop hemorrhaging this money on this absurd test that is not working. If you're going to redo the Army physical fitness test, use body weight exercises. It won't cost anything, and miraculously soldiers will improve. Okay, there is always room for improvement on the APFT. Nobody doubts that, but it should not require tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah. I will say that the best training I had for finally mastering a leg tuck was doing more push-ups. So, I mean, there's full circle for you. The best way to be able to do a leg tuck is to be able to do more push-ups, which you could have done under the old fitness test. So again, read the article over at ClearanceJobs.com. Thank you, David Brown, for joining us to chat about it. Please don't email David about it. We love David. We want him to continue writing about the Army Combat Fitness Test. We don't want him to stop because you send him hate mail. You can send me hate mail because I have low self-esteem anyway. So I will just already take all your hate and just regurgitate it into my inner self. So just send me your comments. David, thank you for joining us. Thank you, everyone who joined us. Somebody says, please don't bring back the beret. Who doesn't like a nice beret, though? It's so fancy and it never sits right on your head. Anyway, thank you for joining us. This episode brought to you by Topher and Ben, the sleeping and the awake cat. Thanks, everybody.